Hi everyone, Shane Stevenson here, but not at the Buffalo Naval Park. And again, this is episode 1, here with David Faix, the education coordinator and docent, and we are going to be talking about 3 very interesting things in this video today. We are going to be talking about the history of the Bell aircraft plant here in Buffalo, New York, and in Marietta, Georgia. We are going to be doing a walk around Miss Lend Lease, right, that you see behind us, and we'll learn a little bit more about that red star that you see there. And then, from a collections and archiving standpoint, unbelievably, we are going to talk about the logbook that was with this P-39. So it's very exciting stuff, and we're glad you're here with us.
Hello everybody, and welcome to the Niagara Aerospace Museum. We are at the Niagara Falls International Airport in the old terminal. We were founded in 1998, and presently we have a great display of not just Bell aircraft history, but a lot of the aviation industry in Western New York that would include Curtiss and actually General Motors. So here we have a very good ideas to what the major role that Bell aircraft played during World War II. This was a hub of aircraft production, including the very famous Bell P-39 Airacobra. We see here the production facility that's a quarter mile east of our museum, and there's the production line where they produced 10,000 P-39s during World War II. That's a great history to start with. They also had a facility located in Marietta, Georgia, where they produced 600 B-29 bombers.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
Oh, this is an incredible history here that a lot of locals know only about the Niagara Falls facility, but have no sense of the real history that we can boast about here in Western New York. We also have some other photos of our production facilities here.
And this is an active airport and military base, is that correct?
And it's an Air Force base as well. If you look across the field when you come to our museum, you're going to see a lot of aircraft motion. All right, this is one of the photos that I love the best. Not only does it highlight the production of the Bell P-39s, again by the thousands, but we also begin to see the role that women during World War II. We're going to do an episode about Rosie the Riveter, and many of the locals in Niagara Falls and Western New York area were part of the production line. If we zoom in on this one lady that's looking at us,
oh, sure.
Her name is Christine McCann, and we know that because her nephew came to our museum not too long ago, and as soon as he saw that photo, he says, "That's my aunt. I know her." So we're very fortunate to have so many visitors to our museum that can identify with our exhibits.
So David, now that we're standing in front of Miss Lend Lease, why don't you tell us a little bit as we walk around of the plane itself?
All right, Miss Lend Lease has such a fantastic and beautiful story, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to let her tell the story as we do our walk around no November numbers, just 44-2911. That's her serial number. That's the way she came off the production line on Christmas Day, 1943. Now, from there, she went to a country called Russia. Russia during World War II was the enemy of our enemy, which made her not an ally, but a close nation that we supplied 5,000 of these P-39s to during the war years. First indication of that is when the Russians got this aircraft, and we're going to trace that transition from Niagara Falls all the way to Russia a little later on, you're going to begin to see that they painted the red star over the American Army Air Force emblem or insignia. It's noteworthy to know that that star is somewhat covered by this metal, and that's part of the history of this aircraft. The Russians used this as an interceptor and essentially as a way to shoot down German bombers who were penetrating into Russian airspace. And as part of these dive bombing maneuvers, they would stress the metal on the tail to the point where the tail section had to be reinforced. And that's what you see here, the metal reinforcement of the tail section of our P-39. So a good indication as to how well it was used by the Russians.
So what we are seeing is, you can see right here, everybody, the stars cut off. The point would have continued right here, roughly. And then you're seeing this piece of metal.
And it goes all the way around
to here.
Right.
And then right through here.
And over through here.
And over through here. So this was a modification by the Russian Air Force because of those stresses.
Exactly. And not only that, but you can begin to see here, sadly, because of its exposure to the windows in our museum, our paint is fading, and we recently had a fundraiser where we're trying to at least preserve what we already have instead of losing even more detail on our beautiful P-39.
So that's amazing. You can also see the point of the American star up there.
And you can see the blue of the stars and bars.
Yeah. Yeah, so everyone, as David was just mentioning, let's take a quick look over here. This was the terminal for the Niagara Falls airport. And so this makes sense, just like you'd see at a gate today. There'd be chairs here. You can watch the planes pull right up. And so when David's mentioning about fundraising, because as you can see, it gets I mean, the windows are nice, but it gets a lot of sun throughout the day, and we're getting into the fall, so you can imagine a whole summer of sun beating in on the plane like this. And so I know David has put forth some plans to do some preservation. But let's continue.
Okay, as we move along, obviously we have this entire aircraft. We don't always have it here for display. This is where the wing section, you can see the outline of where the wings would be.
So you do have them here on site, just...
We had them in our storage area in what was the Bell Aircraft Corporation facility, just a quarter-mile east of us. This is an unusual aircraft. It was built with the engine in the middle of the fuselage instead of... Most of the aircraft at that time had the engine up front, and that was intentional, and we'll get into that very shortly here. I like to call this the front office of our P-39. This is where the pilot would sit. This is the cockpit area, and it's a single pilot aircraft. It has a very unusual feature in the fact that this is a car door.
It's a car door.
It was a car door. At that particular time, that was the style of the day, and this is what the Bell engineers used to build this P-39. And this is where the little door handle would be to crank down the window. And there is a little armrest here that you could also use to close this particular door.
Unbelievable. Do we have any idea what car it would have come off of?
I wish I could tell you that.
Okay.
We don't know that at this particular point. But this brings back some less than fond memories I have of cars that I owned. With that crank down the window.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you had the same experience.
I did.
All right.
But, and we also have some guns lubricated with AXS 777 and push to close. I mean, this is one of the hugest differences is that our P-39 Snooks II is not able to be viewed this up close because we are mounted from the ceiling. So everyone looks at it from below, and this is prompting me to try and bring a closer look so I can get a better handle on what our P-39 looks like on the interior. This is an astounding way of displaying this, David, and obviously there's some questions, kids touching it and things like that, that I know you've addressed throughout the years, but I mean, just to be this up close and personal is fabulous.
Yeah, forgive me for mentioning her age. She's 81 years old, and she is showing a little bit of wear and tear. I apologize for revealing her age, but let's move on.
Yes.
All right, what you're also going to see here when this aircraft reached Russia, not only did they paint the red star on the tail section, but this aircraft was part of what was called White Unit 23, a supply unit. And this is the aircraft that a Russian pilot was flying when this aircraft went down. He was on a resupply mission, and we'll get into that in one of our episodes here. Sadly, again, like the red star, the paint is so faded, it's barely detectable that this was painted in white at one particular time by the Russians. Moving on, this is what I call the business end of this aircraft. This is what really intrigued not just the Americans, but especially the Russians. It was designed with two purposes or two missions in mind. One was going to be as an air interceptor, air-to-air combat, and the other one was for ground support. If America was ever invaded, especially by sea, that this aircraft would have the weapon system to repel any kind of a land invasion. And that's why the two major features of this aircraft, the weapon system, include a 37 millimeter rapid fire cannon. It has a magazine of 37 millimeter shells. It also has 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, and likewise under each wing it also has a 50 caliber machine gun. This was probably one of the most heavily armed aircraft at the beginning of World War II, and because the Russians got it, they were primarily interested in what they'd call their tank killer, even though it was rarely used for that. But when the Russians got this aircraft, that was the thing that they thought would be most useful, although it was primarily used for as an interceptor with any kind of invading aircraft.
So can we review that? There is the 37 millimeter in the nose, 50 caliber, well, still on the nose, but above the framing, and then the wings also had 30s or 50.
One on each wing, yes.
50 cal.
And this is where the propellers would come from. So this cannon actually fired through the nose
Yes.
of this aircraft, and you can still see the rifling in that opening, which is where that 37 millimeter shell is going to be shot from.
And this is
This is the mechanism that came from this aircraft. This is a drive shaft that comes from the mid-engine. It goes underneath the pilot's seat, and this is through all kinds of gearing, would spin the propeller, could activate the machine guns and this 37 millimeter rapid fire cannon. And something that a lot of people know about World War II and even before aircraft, to make sure that you don't shoot off the propellers on any kind of an aircraft when you're firing machine gun bullets through it. These are called interrupters. This was a technology developed during World War I, but incorporated into this aircraft. So it was a way of making sure that you could not only shoot your cannon, but also shoot any of your weapon systems like these 50 caliber machine guns at the same time. That's what made it so desirable, especially for the Russians.
So you have done some restoration work. You or the organization has done some restoration work, like almost like bright work, right? Because this component isn't really great shape.
This was cleaned up. It's part of when we tried to present this as an exhibit. Even before the museum opened, it was going to be, first of all, cleaned out, gutted, and as we're trying to restore it for exhibit or presentation, that's when a lot of the work done to make this at least presentable. When we see a photo of her coming out of Lake Martin Yard, she was not the most presentable lady.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent, thank you. Let's, you want to move on to the port side, I guess, of the plane, if we want to call it that?
This is the port side. Yeah, that's a good nautical term for describing the same thing here. Again, single pilot. We have the outline of the aircraft wing section. And we have the same reinforcement on the tail here, but now we see a little bit more about her tail number here. Tail number 42911. That's the serial number. Before she became known as Miss Lend Lease, generically she was 42911.
And that's such an interesting name, Miss Lend Lease. How did that come about?
All right. That's actually part of a program the United States had before and then the early part of World War II. Lend Lease meant that we would lend our allied or friendly nations war material instead of selling those. America was trying to maintain its neutrality before World War II for us began with Pearl Harbor. So if we sold any war material to countries like France or England or Australia, for instance, we would have been considered allied with them and we would lose our neutrality. So we lent our Miss Lend Lease to the Russians, and that's where we get the word lend. I'm not sure if you've ever lent your car to somebody, but that's basically the idea. Here, you can use our aircraft.
Yes.
And that's really the origins of this program, and that's why we called her Miss Lend Lease.
Well, this is a beautiful tour around and pointing out some of those interesting stories like the reinforced tail. Of course, the business end, as you had mentioned, the cockpit. And so now what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the logbook, and you will give the origins of that. So David, now you're going to show us an artifact that was on the plane or in the plane when she was retrieved. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yes, what we have here is the flight log for serial number 42911, being flown by a Russian pilot named Ivan Baranovsky. This is the cover to the flight log, and these are the entries. How's your Russian, Shane?
Not good.
Yeah, neither is mine. So we do have
We won
a book.
the Cold War for a reason.
Yeah, there is a good reason why we're not going to speak specifically about the entries here, but we do know the general history of this aircraft and how it wound up in Russian hands at the end of World War II. So let's get into a little bit more about this map and what it represents as to what happened to our Miss Lend Lease when she left Niagara Falls on December the 25th, 1943. She was flown with several stops to Great Falls, Montana, by what was called the WASPs, the Women's Army Service Pilots.
Oh, tell me more about them, yeah.
They were the civilian pilots in World War II, and these ladies were the ones that would transport these aircraft from the factories, sometimes not into war zones, but they would be positioned all around the United States. The one limitation that they had, because they were civilian, is they could not leave the continental United States. So one of our pilots, about 80%, by the way, of all the aircraft that were coming out of our aircraft industry factories during World War II were ferried to locations by these WASP or women pilots. Obviously, because the men are already engaged in uniform and in military action somewhere in the world.
So what you're saying is from leaving the plant a quarter of a mile away from where we're standing to Great Falls, Montana, this path was flown by one of those WASPs.
Yes, it was. And from Great Falls, Montana, then male pilots would retrieve or take possession of these aircraft, and they would fly them through the western part of Canada. This is called the Northwest Staging Route, NWSR, where they would be jumping from or being refueled from one airfield to another that were built specifically by the Allies and by Canada to transport not just this P-39, but most of the aircraft that went to Russia and Europe during the war years took this same route from American factories. Here in Fairbanks is where our aircraft was turned over to the Russian pilots. They would then fly it to Siberia, where they would refuel it and fly it into Siberia and then position it to whatever forward bases they wanted to. That's when they would paint the red star on these aircraft. That's when they painted number 23, White Unit 23 on this aircraft, and then they were flown throughout Russia at one part or another during the war years. And that's how we have a little bit of a sense as to how our P-39 made it all the way to a place called Murmansk. I'm going to give you a little bit of the dates here as to what was happening to our aircraft.
Sure.
Pardon me for referring to my notes.
I do it all the
right.
time. You have to do it.
December 25th, 1943, she left the factory right here in Niagara Falls. January the 9th, 1944, she's in Fairbanks, Alaska, where the Russians take possession of her. She's flown to Nome, Alaska on February the 1st. By October of 1944, she is in Murmansk in western part of Russia. On November the 19th, 1944, she goes missing in action. And unfortunately, we know nothing about her for 60 years until the summer of 2004, when serial number 2911 is pulled out of a lake called Mart Yarv in northwestern Russia.
So we hope that you like this episode 1. I can't thank David enough for his support and certainly his expertise, and so grateful to be working with the Niagara Aerospace Museum. So today we covered again in today's episode the history a little bit of the Bell Aircraft Corporation. We did a walk around the Miss Lend Lease, and we learned a little bit about the logbook. And thanks so much, Dave.
I really appreciate being able to do this for your viewers.
Yeah, that's great. And helping get the word out about the Niagara Aerospace Museum. It's not just the P-39 that they have here. We will see you again, everyone, for episode 2. And thanks, as always, for your support. I'll be linking the website for the Niagara Aerospace Museum in the description. And if you can support, please support this museum and other like organizations. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again soon.